Welcome back. We're now into the 21st video in the Flow Certified Professional Online Training Series. We're looking at culture, how it's defined, and here in part B, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into what it takes to actually direct the flow of your culture. It's just going to be a small taste, but it's a huge task and undertaking to do cultural transformation. The leadership takeaways here are going to be the key responsibilities for the executives who are going to be governing Agile in the future. They're going to have to change the way they do things. And some executives are actually willing to do the change. At least they give the lip service. They talk the talk. Watching them walk the talk, they're not understanding that they need to walk the talk in a way that gives the organization the safety and the comfort and the trust that the changes that the teams are making at the team level will still be there later when if different leaders are brought in, that it's just not going to be flavor of the month. And so you got to build that trust over time in order to make sure that the transformation gains the momentum and continues in the direction that you want it to go. So this includes vision and culture, communicating flow, and prioritizing and understanding what your organizational velocity really is. So I've split these into a few different things, and we're probably going to look at this over more than just this video as well. Some of these will pop up later. In this one, we're definitely going to talk about vision and culture and managing the communication flow at each organizational level. And either in this video or future videos further down, we'll be looking at the prioritization of the work efforts that the executives need to do, and the necessity for understanding your organization's velocity. Because if you don't understand your ability and throughput and be able to balance the load, the demand, and the ability to deliver, it's load balancing is basically what it is. And as executives, if you're not doing that and you're not getting this, and you try Agile, and then the teams want to get to scaled Agile, there's going to come a point in time where it's going to be a ton of friction, and it's going to create a lot of heartburn for the leadership of an organization. Let's just be blunt and honest about it. So a clear vision for the change just isn't enough. I've said this before. You have to walk the talk. You can't just talk the talk. You actually have to change. And stop under-communicating the vision by a factor of 10, according to Dr. Cotter. You have to communicate your vision for any kind of cultural or transformational change that you want to do. You got to communicate it 10 times more than you think. This is like running a political campaign. You have to run it just like a political campaign. Now, here's the part companies don't want to hear. If you use the typical ADCAR and Association of Change Management Professionals, all the different frameworks and tools that they have, and they don't do a bad job. We're going to see their percentages here in a minute, and they outperform traditional waterfall by about a factor of 2 to 1. It's still not enough. And if you use their tools, it's going to take you 5 to 7 years to make the changes. Now, if you don't have buy-in from the board and the C-level, from the CEO right on down, if they're not in it and are going to be actively changing personally it's not even worth trying. Just don't waste your money. Don't waste your time. Okay? Now, uh, this is just personal experience talking here. When I went and worked for a publishing company about almost 10 years ago now, yeah, it's almost exactly 10 years ago that I worked with them. Um, we trained everybody, board members, CEO, CTO, COO, Director of Business Management, Director of New Product Development, right across the board. And when I interviewed the CTO and the COO, I told both of them, look, if you guys aren't going to be trained, and the same for the CEO, I said, if you guys aren't going to be trained, I'm not showing up. And they were like, oh, well, this is really important. Okay, we'll all get trained, even if it was only half a day. But they were all actually willing to make the change. And it was really interesting that over time, about a year and a half into my time there, I was there for almost 3 years. A year and a half in, one of the other board members, and they were chatting with each other, and the one said to the other, they said, have you noticed how much our vocabulary and the way we communicate has changed just in this last year and a half? And they're like, yeah, and it's been really good. And so changing the language is one of the keys for changing the culture. Now, Agilists will start to howl right about now, because I'm going to say you have to adapt the existing corporate governance to Agile governance. And what I'm talking about probably isn't what the purists are talking about, because the Agile purists, they view management as the root of all evil and they want to get rid of everybody. The reality is that's not going to happen unless you're funding your own projects. Don't forget the golden rule: he who has the money, he who has the gold, rules. So in an organization, he who has the budget rules. And so you need to be aware of that. And I don't think Agilists really get it sometimes when they're out there, oh, these bad managers and they're evil and they're only out for themselves. Well, if they're a good manager, they understand that they have a stewardship, a fiduciary responsibility to the stockholders and the stakeholders and to the employees. What the weight that those guys are carrying is incredible. And I don't think the worker bees on the front line and on the Agile teams really get how much burden that these guys are actually carrying. I don't think they appreciate what these leaders are actually doing for them. Now, what about startups? Guess what? Still applies. I like the Frugal example I gave you. Half the teams were Agile, half the teams were traditional, and they were at war with each other. And so you already had cultural hiccups in a startup. And I've seen that over and over again, both in startups and in big organizations. So just because you're a startup, you're not immune to the things that we're talking about here. Now, we've talked about this already, at least the three issues, and especially the cascading vision, the VSPT, one thing at every level with the link back to the one thing. We talked about the three issues of language dilution and distilling down to the one thing. We're going to also, throughout these videos, look at the 4D model and the 4R models, and the flow formula and the 4 lenses of transformation. Now, the 4D model and 4R model, those are extremely effective tools for making sure you keep individuals and teams on track. The flow formula, which is vision plus right people plus the 4D model, equals flow. And then you've got the 4 lenses on transformation with individuals, teams, product, program, process, line management, and then the organization box with portfolio on up to the C-suite and executives. those are the ways you communicate flow, and we use those to communicate flow. Especially in the reporting, we have different reporting depending on which lens we're looking at. Here's an example of at a large level for a huge program where this is from the Singtel project assignment that's written about in Flow. It's basically the key case study for all of Flow. Using the communications calculator of n times n minus 1, all of that divided by 2, using that formula, when we had 440 stakeholders in the program that our small team was trying to implement, that just doesn't work. That works out with 440 stakeholders using this formula. That's a potential of 96,580 channels of communication. You talk about noise. This is noise. So I was able to work with the senior vice president and said, look, we're gonna die. This isn't gonna work. We need to eliminate 400 stakeholders and break this down to 40 stakeholders max. Everyone else are just going to be informed. We're going to send a newsletter out to them, but only those 40 stakeholders will have a voice. You choose. So he chose his top 40 that he felt were most important. And there was a lot of noise about the fact that we just took 400 stakeholders and pushed them off to the side because that was countercultural to their culture. But it created a 91% reduction in stakeholders and a 99% reduction in channels and almost 100% reduction in noise. The steering committee that met every Friday and had a 4-hour shouting match, that was 38 people, not including consultants in the room. So that was 703 channels. So I talked to the senior vice president. So I said, that doesn't work. That's not doable. And he goes, oh, well, okay. So basically, these 38 ended up, 26 of them ended up over here with these key stakeholders. And we had a steering committee of 12 people. I only wanted 8. And after going back and forth with the senior vice president, he said, no, I need these 12. And it's like, okay, whatever. And by reducing it from 38 to 12, we got a 68% reduction in stakeholders and a 91% reduction in channels. And again, we got about a 90% reduction in noise. And so this is a hands-on way of taking the tools that, out of the toolkit when you need to use them in order to communicate to C-level type people and say, look, what we've created here, how's that working for you? You're 2 years in and you're now projecting it's going to take an additional 3 years at a 200% increase over budget. Do you really want to keep doing that? No. And so by doing this was one of the key things that helped get the project back on track. As I mentioned earlier, Flow's that umbrella that sits over the top of this methodology continuum. Traditional waterfall, they have a 14 to 16% success rate. I've been tracking with the Swedish Project Management Institute. They'd been doing a study for years, and the last I checked, they had gone from 14% to 15% to 16% to 16%. At that rate, they'll never catch up to the 42% success rate that they have with Agile and Scrum. The Association of Change Management Professionals, they had a statistic out there at one point in time that they have a 30% success rate. Nobody ever has a 100% success rate with your projects, and the measurement for the success rate was on time, on budget, delivering 80% of the scope. Okay? On time, on budget, delivering 80% of the scope, and only 14% succeed. So even if you use the higher number that the Swedish chapter was getting was 16%, that's what is that? That's like 1 in 6 projects, 1 in 7 projects are going to succeed. That might be something to just stop and think about. Okay. Already with Agile and Scrum, you're almost tripling your chances of success rate. It's triple if you do 14 to 42, but if you do 16, it's still just under 3 times better. Even if you just do change management or as compared to project management, you're going to get double the success rate. So it's something to think about, and this is something that we've used for almost 10 years to try to describe what we do, why we do it, and why it works. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this. Here's one of the reasons that teams, projects, programs, portfolios tend to fail. As you're going down through the quarters, Q1, Q2, Q3, when you start the effort, everybody's tightly aligned. But every quarter, it's getting further and further apart. Well, one of the key reasons is that most of the executives can barely remember what it was that they heard and agreed to 3 months ago. It's already past history. They're not interested, but it's this divergence that creates division and multiple visions. And so that happens over time. To prevent that, you need to have your current vision going to the future vision, your current culture going to the future culture. And it's a combination of your leadership teams and organization that will make that happen. And so it's a journey. It takes time. It just doesn't happen. And so it happens one iteration at a time, person by person, team by team, department by department, division by division, and then organization wide. And this is why it can take 5 to 7 years to do a full transformation from waterfall traditional up to truly being agile, not just doing agile, but actually being agile, both with tool set and mindset. So we're coming up on 42% complete, and we went through the key responsibilities for executives governing Agile. It's your job to shape the vision and the culture. If you're not doing it right, it'll come back and hurt you. It's your job to manage the communication and the flow. I gave you the example from Singtel about if you've got too many stakeholders or too many people on a steering committee, you got to reduce it down to a size that's appropriate and that will allow for true communication to happen. And remember to keep 10 times more than you think, keep communicating the vision. And then we'll look at prioritization and organizational velocity a little bit further down. So the application of this, there's hard questions you need to start asking yourself as a leader. Am I, as a leader, helping to reduce the noise in the organization, or am I contributing to the noise and confusion? There are a lot of people out there that will use Machiavellian principles or Alexandrian divide and conquer. And so using confusion is a great way to kill any project. As a leader, how can I apply vision to help my teams reach their potential? And one of the things I need to know is what's my organizational velocity. And we're going to actually show you how to measure those things in some of the last videos in this entire series.